Well, for me, the good life and living well are deeply intertwined with purpose and meaning, living a purposeful, meaningful life. And for me, purpose is always connected to being of service and being part of something greater.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. Our guest today is Meena Srinivasan. She is a seasoned educational leader, celebrated speaker, accomplished author, and visionary edupreneur. I would like for her to say a little bit more about that as we go along. With over 2 decades of dedicated service, she's always been an educator activist at heart, consistently championing the fusion of mindfulness and social and emotional learning. In 2022, she was featured as one of Mindful Magazine's 10 Powerful Women of the Mindfulness Movement, while also gaining recognition in Educational Leadership magazine for her insights into mindful leadership and well-being. Hi, Meena.
Hey, Broderick. It's so good to reconnect. It's been a while. It's been some time since I was last in your presence, and I'm really looking forward to just being in conversation with you today.
I am as well. I'm excited for this. I think that you have a lot to share, and I think my audience will benefit tremendously from this conversation. So let's jump right on into it. So, how do you typically? I know I just read that introduction, but how do you typically share yourself to the world? Talk about
Mm.
yourself. Who are you, Meena?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I've been meditating a lot on just where I am now in my life. And when we first met, I was working in the Oakland Unified School District, leading some of the systemic implementation of social and emotional learning there. And I was just coming out with my first book around bringing mindfulness really in and out of the classroom. But that book was part of the first wave of mindfulness and education books. And when we first connected, it was a particular point in time where I really identified as a leader in the field of mindfulness and social and emotional learning, and had been dedicating, my life, really my professional life, up until that point in that space. And I feel like now I'm at a threshold. And I had a child. He's now 5, and having a child has been a really extraordinary journey for me. And one of the things I'm contemplating a lot is um, is this sort of matriarch archetype. And a lot of working women and mothers who are holding many things as I do in the world, um, I think are navigating how to show up in fullness. So much of what's out there in the world around women leadership, for example, there's this like boss bitch archetype, and which is definitely not my journey, um, and I'm trying to really explore what it means to lead from this space of great compassion, this fierce tenderness, this motherly love that has become more accessible to me as I've journeyed into motherhood. And, so often what we see out there is this sense of like, for women out there in the world, to be a superwoman, right? To do it all. And I'm really reflecting more deeply on thinking about my own ancestral lineage of the sacred feminine, of the divine mother, and in my work. And we'll talk more about, where I am now professionally and the work I do in the world, which is very much focused on transformative leadership. What does it mean to fully embody and inhabit this matriarch identity, the sacred feminine, the yin in a very yang world, and to show up in my fullness and my juiciness as a woman on the path of awakening that's here to. I think my story is really one of someone who is deeply committed to doing the work that the universe, God, source, whatever you want to call it, has intended for me to do in the world, and to continuously listen to that, especially as it evolves and has different incarnations, and to move in the world with purpose, but always in service of bringing more compassion and equity into the world.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. There was a lot of things there you said that I hope we get to unpack in this hour. So I really admire your take on motherhood and embracing motherhood and embracing your womanness in your view. And I'm glad you articulated that there are different takes on that. And you're embracing yours, you're finding yours. And I know that you've done quite a bit of work and mindfulness and compassion and all of these different things. I'm curious about just from the beginning, and we'll unpack it. But what is your view on living well? All of what you just said about yourself, how does that fit within the context of your view on what it means to live well, the good life, etc.?
Hmm. Well, for me, the good life and living well are deeply intertwined with purpose and meaning, living a purposeful, meaningful life. And for me, purpose is always connected to being of service and being part of something greater, and that listening I talked about. I think, throughout my life and career, and, I'm in my 40s now. And so just as I've journeyed over the past 4 decades or so, really listening to what is it that is my work to do in the world that is like I can do many things, but what is it that is truly for me to do in the world? And I think a lot about, there's a famous line from the Bhagavad Gita, around, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, when Krishna says to Arjuna, it's better to do your dharma poorly than someone else's well. And essentially live your life. And so that always struck me, and I've sort of been on this quest around honoring my swadharma, this path that the universe has set forth, and to really listen to that. And what that means is, it often means not having like an ultimate goal or an ultimate plan, or, people talk about like the 10-year vision or the 5-year vision. And that's really not how I roll. For me, it's always been trying to cultivate this capacity for listening and receptivity, and really touching into what are my gifts, and how does that meet the world's greatest needs, and sort of that intersection of the world's needs and what I'm here to offer. And it's been a beautiful journey because it keeps evolving, and I've sort of let go of like long-term planning, because what life has shown me is when you surrender. And I'll never forget, when I was 28, I was in Bodh Gaya, and like sitting under the foot of the Bodhi tree, and just saying, all right, universe, like my life is yours. And in that act of surrender and kind of giving my life away, what came to me was more than I could ever conceive. And it's really been this beautiful path of serendipity, divine synchronicity, and and surrender.
Mm, beautiful. Yeah, you mentioned again quite a few things there, and you mentioned some of your past, and you even mentioned the term path, and I'm interested in how have you come to this view of valuing purpose
Mm.
and really um, in your conception of living well and the good life is intertwined with your purpose that's deeper than just your individual self. You mentioned your intention, your desire to, and this is my word, well-being, to contribute to the well-being of others. I'm curious, where did this come from? I know you just mentioned the Bhagavad Gita
Mm.
and about being in India, sitting under the Bodhi tree. Let's go back into the history of Meena, and can you just share, where you come from? What are some of your influences and in your past that that led you to see the world this way?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Broderick. So, I'm the child of Indian immigrants, and my dad came to the United States in 1970. My mom came in 1973. And I feel so blessed to have had a really deep connection to my indigenous wisdom stream through my family, through my ancestors, and to um, have had a childhood that um, really rooted me in this deep sense of cultivating my own personal relationship with the divine. So at a young age, I remember I'd go to these kind of spiritual summer camps. And I remember like learning yoga nidra when I was like 11 and doing these practices myself and really having this this sense of the most important relationship for me in this life is cultivating my relationship with the divine, and also recognize the divine is in me and the divine is in everyone and the divine is in everything. And that was such a gift to grow up with that. And and I think what it contributed to, even as a child of immigrants and being a woman of color, it contributed to having a sense of agency at a young age. And so, I think I was like the one of the first Indians, and definitely first Indian American woman to be, the president of my class, and and just really having this yeah, just this sense of agency. I remember in 5th grade being really, really upset about the use of styrofoam, and like starting a direct action campaign and like negotiating with the school board and trying to get rid of styrofoam lunch trays. And so I think there's always been, and of course it's from my parents who, I definitely had to take the role of being a cultural broker, as many children of immigrants, because my parents are navigating a new culture and experiences, and a lot of children of immigrants play this role. But even though I had to do a lot of that cultural translation for my parents, I always felt loved, and they may not still understand what I do for a living, but I feel boundless love from them. And so, that's been a huge gift. Um, but just to fast forward a little bit, I ended up going to a very prestigious liberal arts college. I think at the time it was like the #1 liberal arts college in the country, Amherst College. And the philosophy behind the liberal arts is we train you for nothing and prepare you for everything. And my time there, though, was complex. And I think being in an environment where um, I had been, I kind of, had been in the same school district from kindergarten, knew everyone, and being in this new space with kids who had just way more privilege and access than I did growing up. Um, I'd say that it was maybe not a dark period, but a period of time where, I think like a lot of us in young adulthood, we're kind of returning back to some of those questions around who am I? Why am I here? And at the same time, though, my intuition was still really strong. And I had this. Um, just this sense that I was meant to go abroad. And so I did spend my junior year studying at the London School of Economics, but I had a job lined up at the ABC network in New York after college. And instead, I deferred that and I went to Brazil. And I taught at an American school in Sao Paulo. And that experience changed my life because for the first time I was in this environment where there's this sense of, you know, you work to live, not living to work, which was very much kind of the immigrant kind of reality of like, like we came here with $200 and, you work hard and you make it. And so it really widened my view. And when I was in Brazil, people would say to me, like, Você Indiana, teach me about spirituality. And I'm like, I grew up in New Jersey playing soccer. But I did have that seed planted at a very young age. In fact, my neighbors growing up were connected with the Siddha yoga community. And so I learned a lot of practices rooted in, non-dual Kashmir Shaivism through them at a young age. So that spiritual seed was always there, and it really started to blossom when I was in Brazil, and that's when I started a regular. I had done yoga. I was exposed through these spiritual camps, but really started studying yoga and Ayurveda and having a regular practice, and it really. Enhanced kind of my relationship with the divine and the cultivation of this relationship with the divine. And I had like a spontaneous spiritual experience, like a Kundalini awakening when I was 22, that really set my life on a different course. So here I was going to Amherst College, had this job lined up at the ABC network, but I listened to my heart and spent this time in Brazil, and I had this spiritual awakening. And had this real sense of like, all right, this is the relative dimension. And I had a taste of the ultimate dimension. The only way to describe it, and I've never done any drugs or anything like that. It was like this beautiful 3 days where everything felt like an extension of me and I was an extension of everything, sort of a felt sense of non-duality. I was like, oh, this is what the yogis are talking about. This is like great beings, like enlightened beings. This is their natural state. There is no sense of separation. And once I had that taste of what I kind of refer to as the ultimate dimension, my trust and faith in the divine only grew stronger. It sort of became unshakable. And what I've learned through the years since that is that while I'm so grateful for that experience of the ultimate dimension, that we have to honor both the ultimate and the relative dimension because they're both always at play. And sometimes we need to rest a little more in the ultimate, and sometimes we need to pay attention a little more to the relative. And so, there's a lot of conversations around spiritual bypassing. And I think part of that is when we want to just be in the ultimate dimension, but we're not paying attention to the importance of the interplay of the relative or the ultimate, or sometimes in my lineage, it's the historical. So after Brazil, I came back to the United States. I did go to ABC and worked in New York, and just knew in my heart that this wasn't my ultimate path. It was so funny when I was in my undergrad, I thought, oh, I want to be a foreign news producer. And I was working towards that. And I had like internships at Bloomberg and Reuters in London, and just really thought that was my path. But after Brazil, it was so clear that the universe, had another path in store for me. So after a year, I I left and I really fell in love with teaching when I was in Brazil. Never thought I'd become an educator, but when I was there, I read Parker Palmer's The Courage to Teach, which is like, what a gift. My first year of teaching, that was my professional development, that we teach who we are, and this real emphasis on integrating our personal and professional journey and our inner life with our outer life, and just understanding the seamlessness of that to be able to show up in our fullness. And so after a year at ABC, I actually, at the time, I'd become vegan, and I was a raw vegan at the time, and was like, I need good produce. I'm moving to California. And so I moved to California. I got my teaching credential, also deepening my practice of yoga, and which had really, really blossomed in Brazil. And when I say yoga, I'm not just talking about, like this like core power hot yoga stuff. I'm talking about, like the essence, right? Like chitti vriddhi nirodha, like stopping our mind from these mental oscillations, like really trying to embody love. For me is an essence of what yoga is. And so I went to grad school at Berkeley in the School of Education, but I also studied Sanskrit when I was there, which was a real gift to be able to connect with that part of my own ancestral lineage. And one night I woke up and I had this calling, like this voice that was like, Meena, you got to go to India. And I was like, go to India? Like my parents left India, in the 70s, but I just knew I had to get there. That part of my karmic journey, like I had to go. And so I got a job teaching at the American Embassy School in New Delhi. And I moved to India, and I spent 5 years there really to deepen my contemplative practice and my spiritual journey. And the time in India was so magical. I developed a close friendship with one of Mahatma Gandhi's grandsons, the late Professor Ramchandra Gandhi, who introduced me. I mean, I already was familiar with Ramana Maharishi, but Professor Gandhi, Ramana Maharishi was Professor Gandhi's teacher. And, and Ramana Maharishi is the one who we often talk about, who, coined the phrase, who am I, and a really special, enlightened being. And so that was really powerful for me, and kind of led me on my journey of studying Advaita Vedanta, or the particular school of non-dualism. And then a few years later, Thich Nhat Hanh came to India. And I'll never forget the moment I was in Thich Nhat Hanh's presence for the first time, was at Gandhi Darshan. And I was just overcome with emotion. It was as if I was hit by a tsunami of love. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but it's just like, I felt like when I was in Thich Nhat Hanh's presence for the first time, that I had found something that I had been looking for my whole life. And it was so clear to me that this was the next part of my journey. And so everywhere Thich Nhat Hanh was when he was in India, I'd be there and be like, where's this like this Indian American girl is like showing up everywhere. And I ordained, I went to Plum Village, and a few years later ordained into the Tiep Hien lineage. And I actually now serve on the board of the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation. And Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, his philosophy, I felt like he articulated everything in my heart, like everything that I felt through the spiritual experiences I had. I felt that he gave language, and concrete practices, and ethical. I mean, we say precepts, but I'd say mindfulness trainings for. And, the lineage that I've ordained into is the order of interbeing. And interbeing is, there's no real definition for it. It refers to kind of the interdependent nature of reality. One of the most beautiful ways Thich Nhat Hanh describes interbeing is, and this is, one of my first encounters with him. He holds up a piece of paper and says, if you look deeply, you'd see there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without the cloud, there'd be no rain. Without the rain, there'd be no trees. Without the trees, the paper cannot grow. The tree is essential, or the cloud is essential for the paper to exist. And he goes on to say, you can even see the logger who cut down the trees and the logger's ancestors as well. And so Thich Nhat Hanh, or what students of him refer to him as Thai, his great gift to me um, is really a pathway. And, in mindfulness, which is a space, I've been in for a while now, it is a path. It is not all these discrete practices that we say. Mindfulness is a path. And I believe it is a path to help us deepen our experience and understanding of interbeing. And I'll just pause there because I need to take a sip of my drink now.
Beautiful. That was extraordinary because you covered so much territory. I wasn't going to stop it. I think because the story behind the viewpoint and what led to it is, I think, is so important. And when me hearing your story, just reminds me of so many things in my own personal life. But I think that it's very interesting how you came here as immigrants. That's a story that we can definitely unpack further. But you touched on it, the immigrant work ethic and how that was that influence that had on you, and how that you were able to reflect back on that experience when you went to Brazil. But I think that what I find very interesting is how you kind of the full circle. Your parents being Indian, and the viewpoint that you shared. You slipped in there very momentarily about the divine, and we're all essentially an expression of the divine, and how that's such an important part of at least one aspect of Indian culture, and how that culture, even away from the continent of India, growing up here in New Jersey, you were still, maybe because of your parents, but that cultural heritage has had such an influence on you. And I can see how this perspective on seeing that everything is the divine, that your view of what is good has includes in it others.
Mm.
It must, if all of us are an expression of the same thing, the same source, that you naturally include this care for others in your perspective on living well. And living well is not just simply what can I do to just take care of my personal self, all in my own skin. And you've referenced that numerous times throughout the story you just told about your what led you to this perspective. I just think that's very beautiful. There's so many questions that I have, and I know we have limited amount of time. It I would love to hear, for those who don't know, because I'm just a broad audience, those who don't know much about that cultural foundation. There are other questions as well that I'm going to ask, but what is that cultural foundation, um, that cultural Indian foundation that you got, that I see that you've come full circle with in your
Mm.
own way? And I would love to hear a little bit more also about the where Thich Nhat Hanh comes into play,
Yeah.
of a Vietnamese Buddhist
Yeah.
monk, but that resonated so well with
Yeah.
your upbringing, the cultural root
Mm.
that you come from. So what is
Thank you
that
for
for
that.
audience who don't know?
Ooh. Well, it's so funny. We joke around like, yeah, I went to India and met my Vietnamese teacher in India, Um, I I describe myself as a Bhakti Buddhist. And Bhakti, like all Sanskrit words, right? It's really hard to fully translate, but it's devotion. And I feel like the Indian cultural heritage that, like, I could not just be Buddhist. I need that bhakti part. That is such a big part of how I understand and move in the world, this devotional aspect of who I am, that has been, that has been transmitted to me through, countless generations. And just to bring it back to, what I was sharing earlier and kind of where I am now, and really reflecting on this matriarch archetype and the divine feminine. And I think of all the women in my lineage. And also, India is a land of paradox, right? It is a place where
Mhm.
there's a lot of female infanticide, that women are not valued, and yet they worship the mother goddess, right? Where there's it's like a land of paradox and contradiction. And one of the things I've also been exploring a lot is, for me, my mindfulness practice now is about cultivating great spaciousness. So seemingly contradictory feelings can coexist, so I can feel the pain and the possibility of the moment. And I think there's really something to deepening our capacity for holding paradox. I think it's actually one of the most important leadership skills. I think it's necessary in a world that's only growing increasingly more complex. But I'd say the root of that Indian cultural foundation and tradition is devotion, and also um, this like unwavering belief in life beyond the physical plane, the interaction with the spiritual plane, and that's just the way I grew up. Of like, you just, yeah, you're in touch with all these other energies, and you are interacting with the spiritual plane always. And just how that plays out in India, I remember when I was in India, I dated someone who was in the State Department, and they were working on negotiating a very important deal with the Indian government. And I remember them sharing with me, and they were not Indian; they were white American, diplomat, and they were sharing, yeah, like they want to look at the astrological chart of everything before we have the meetings, and and it's just like, and I'm like, of course they do. And so, I kind of grew up with that, but I also recognize that the American part of me, there's a reason why I was born both Indian and American in this life. Um, that American part of me, that the Western woman in me, um, has also been really important in shaping who I am. Um, and, you know, I'd say when I was in India, like, you could take the girl out of America, but you can't take the American out of the girl, like just how I understand things, or even the sense of agency that I have. I think that wouldn't be possible to the same extent if I wasn't born and raised in a country. And let me tell you, I experienced a lot of discrimination and racism growing up, and would have to have another podcast to talk all about that. Um, but but I also felt a sense of agency at a young age as well. But the Indian kind of the gifts. There's so many gifts. Like I'm so grateful I got to spend 5 years in my 20s living in India, because I feel I have a really integrated identity. I think some folks who grow up bicultural or the child of immigrants are like still figuring, am I Indian? Am I American? And I'm like, I don't even think in that like I don't think in dichotomies. I'm Meena. Brazil's in there too, all these other influences. And it feels totally fine for me to have a Vietnamese root teacher and to be a Bhakti Buddhist, because, I think of the banyan tree. They had these extended, I feel like I'm a banyan tree, that
Mhm.
there's these roots that extend out that are from all sorts of places. And, my husband is Japanese and British, but his dad was born and raised in Kenya. And so I think for me, there is this, um, you can't box me in. You can't box me in. And I think that's why I do the work that I do, and why I'm an educator and a spiritual seeker, because I love learning and growing and evolving.
Oh, that's just awesome. Yeah, I was going to go there about the American aspect of you, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. I think sometimes we can forget that the contribution of the American culture towards our sense of agency and the capacity that we have in this democracy to with all its issues, it has its
Yeah.
concerns. And, I'm an African American. I can have a whole nother podcast about that history. But I think that we
Mm.
can also look at the positive aspects of that. And you as a woman, and speaking to your, seeing that contrast when you, particularly when you went to India and spent some time there, and seeing, oh, I picked up something really beautiful there. The sense
Yeah.
of freedom to express myself as a person,
Mm.
how I choose to, of course, within boundaries, within limits. But that's such an important piece that you brought up. And another thing too that I think that is really important, just the diverse experiences in your life, how in Brazil is included in who you are, and you don't limit yourself to one particular identity. And your husband, his that's fascinating, to have a Japanese and British
And his
heritage,
dad was born and raised in Kenya. So
and his
yeah,
dad, yeah, and born and raised in Kenya. That's just
yeah.
fascinating. I think that's very interesting to see um, how the diversity of viewpoints has informed your take, your angle on on life in general, but in particular your
Yeah.
view of what's good.
Well, I wanted to just, share something around that because a lot of my work and, is focused on leading for belonging. And there definitely are ways in which we create conditions for belonging, but belonging also, we have to feel a sense of belonging within. And I think as someone that has, like, safety is within, like belonging is within, it has to start there. It can't be solely an external thing, it's an inside job. And I think part of, not fitting in anywhere has made me feel like I can fit in everywhere. And that's
Mm-hmm.
been part of my journey too. And a big part of that, though, has been this marriage between this kind of devotional path and this path of mindfulness. And I didn't get a chance to kind of like share deeply about Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, but oh my gosh, what a gift! What a gift to the world his presence and his teachings are. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't know if my husband's going to listen to this, but I'm like one of the things I'm most grateful for is probably like Chihiro, my husband, is up there, but like Thich Nhat Hanh might be a little, might inch out a little more. Um, because for me, he provided a pathway, an accessible pathway for living well, for the good life. These mindfulness trainings. We probably don't have time to go through them today, but if anyone is curious, like, Google the 5 mindfulness trainings from Plum Village and take a look. And those trainings for me are the path. They're the path to living well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, can you share just a few of those, some ideas, those 5 trainings? Can you share a little bit about it, since it's such a strong part of
Yeah.
the
Well,
path to
there's
living
technically
well?
there's 14 trainings for those of us who've ordained into the order of interbeing. Actually, you know what? I have my altar is right here, and I'm gonna I keep it on my altar. Oh, oh, I'll never forget the moment when I took refuge with Thich Nhat Hanh. It was in the foothills of the Himalayas in 2008. Weeping, just tears of just gratitude, like, oh, found
Mm-hmm.
my path, found my path. And so, and it's funny that I have 2 Dharma names. The first is that I was given in 2008 is pure confidence of the heart. And I think part of that is because I just felt this deep certainty around this path. And again, with Buddhism, it was never really like Thich Nhat Hanh. It was never really like, the Buddha says, like, don't listen to me, like, try this out for yourself. And one of the trainings in the 14, it's the second training, is non-attachment to view. And that was really what sealed the deal for me, because any tradition that's like, we got it, we got all the answers, is
Mm-hmm.
definitely, I knew it was like, I'm a little suspect of that. So a path that was always about openness and learning and discovery and inquiry. Um, it just made sense for me. So the first training is reverence for life, and it really is. I'm not going to read through these, but they're all worded in a very profound way, and they actually, what exists in them are not only the Four Noble Truths, but the Eightfold Path that the Buddha offered, which is, the pathway to transform suffering, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they're a dynamic, and these trainings are so many different, they've evolved with times based on the needs in the world. And based how we're all evolving, but they're based on the original kind of 5 precepts, which sound very similar to like elements of the 10 Commandments, I'll say, but the way these are worded is very different. And just to name, um, uh, I believe it was when Thich Nhat Hanh was in India, they may have excerpted, they put like an excerpt of one of his books in the paper, and it might have been about drinking, and it was like, he was never like, don't drink. It was like, do it with awareness, do it with mindfulness. Everything will be done with awareness. But I think the particular flavor of this lineage of mindfulness that makes it so distinct from a lot of the modern Western kind of mindfulness, and there is this emphasis on interbeing, which is the ethical foundation. So if we're really practicing mindfulness, we're doing a deep looking. And when we're doing that deep looking, we see the deep inequities in the world. And when we see those deep inequities and we feel our interconnection, really, it's more than interconnection. Um, how can we not act? And I think for me, it was, I was drawn to Thich Nhat Hanh because for me, he's a sacred activist, bringing together the divine with our work in the world, our action in the world. So anyways, the first training is reverence for life, which, traditionally would be like to not kill. But it's, each one of these starts with aware of the suffering. So aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life. I'm committed to cultivate the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. And it goes on to say that I'm determined not to kill, but it also says that I will not, engage in dualistic thinking. So what's beautiful about this training is it invites you to not kill, but to also not judge others. So I've been a vegetarian since I was born into, my ancestors have been vegetarian for thousands of years, born into a vegetarian household, but, went to preschool, saw kids eating meat, asked my mom to eat meat. And my parents were never going to be like, no. So I ate meat from ages 3 to 5. But when I was 5, my neighbor, who are also Indian, and actually Indians from South Africa, and they were vegetarian. They're the ones that were connected with the Siddha yoga tradition. They told me the story of the murdering of this chicken, and like the next day I became vegetarian. And so, but it's for me, um, it's been a very personal journey, and part of the tradition, the lineage, the interbeing community is, to not kill, but to also not judge. And how can you hold both, right? And so that's where that paradox, that holding paradox is so important. The second training is about true happiness, and it's, aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression. I'm committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting. And this is like the modern version of like the don't steal precept. But there's so much in here around right livelihood and mindful consumption. And the next one is about true love, and that's the take on, right, like the training on like don't commit adultery, but it's written in such a beautiful way. And this training has evolved to be really inclusive of all of our friends on the LGBTQIA plus community. But it's yeah, it's been beautiful to just recognize the importance of how we hold our sexual energy, and what does it mean to practice true love. And the next one is about loving speech and deep listening. Oh, So important, right? Earlier,
Mm-hmm.
before we started recording, you and I were talking about the challenges that come with the householder path, and how, oh, you think you got your practice down, and then you get partnered up, and it really is an opportunity to deepen your capacity for that deep listening and for practicing loving speech. Um, and then the last one's around nourishment and healing, which really has to do with, what says aware of suffering caused by unmindful consumption. How are we taking care of our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health? So I don't know. I feel like the answer to living well is right here. So check it out. And a big part of that, though, is recognizing we can't do this alone. So sangha, or we'd also say satsang in my Indian Hindu bhakti cultural tradition. Uh, you gotta surround yourself with community that's also committed to living well. And my son did his first retreat at age of 5. We did a family retreat at one of Thich Nhat Hanh's monasteries. It's near us here in San Diego. And he took something called the Two Promises. So beautiful, because
Mm-hmm.
these children are making commitments to practicing compassion and protecting animals, plants, and minerals. And yesterday we do a practice when I walk my son to school in the mornings, and we do an intention practice, like, what's your intention for today? And yesterday he said it's to not kill creatures because there's so many snails and
Oh.
worms out, but um, that's coming from this beautiful experience he had at the monastery of, being with other young children. And these, I'm so grateful to the monastic community too, because they anchor the practice in a way that householders, I gotta do grocery shopping. I gotta like communicate with my sons. It's a different reality that I'm immersed in. So I'm so grateful for those who've devoted their life to this path, because they anchor the practice for us.
Oh, yes. Beautiful. Yeah, that was just lovely. You covered so much ground. And without me asking a question, I love it. I think that one thing I do love about Thich Nhat Hanh a lot, it is very contemporary. And like you're talking about the various precepts, and in the yoga world, you have the yamas and niyamas, and
Yeah.
you have these observations, and these, I'm going to observe these things, do no harm.
Mm.
And I think that, or you're going to implement those in your life. I love how Thich Nhat Hanh was capable and able to really bring that in a contemporary world, in a
Yeah.
contemporary setting. He's able to take these precepts, these concepts, these ideas, and ground them in practical reality
Yeah,
in
I
our
call it
modern
applied life,
world.
applied mindfulness. It's not,
Exactly.
and I think that's why, as a householder, this path also speaks to me, because it's a family practice.
Hmm.
And I think that's what's just so beautiful about it, because so many other spiritual traditions are like, you got to, go off on the retreat. And I mean, how many traditions you bring your child to the retreat center? My son is at the Dharma talk, it's just, he such a visionary, and he recognized that we have to nourish the family as a whole, that the family that practices together, stays together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah,
Beautiful.
such a
Oh,
gift to the
yeah,
world.
for sure. Um, that was unexpected. I'm glad that all came up. That was great. I'm glad you reviewed those teachings. We have a few about 10 minutes left here. I just wanted to touch on. There was a few things that you mentioned. I know you already do work in education, and you spoke about your love of learning. I have that love of learning. That's part of the impetus of doing this podcast, is to learn from the lives of others, and have conversations with folks about their take on life, in particular, well, what it means to live well, to do good, etc. What is the importance of learning and education? Can you unpack that a little bit more for the audience?
Mhm.
And you mentioned how important it is to you personally. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about the value of education, learning, and I'll throw in one more word term in there, this concept of development and character. Can you
Yeah.
sum that up and for the
Yeah.
audience?
Well, Gosh, ooh. Um, well, for me, I became an educator because I feel like transforming education is how we transform the world. Because the way I saw, what I saw in the field of education was not actually meeting the needs of the moment, in terms of honoring the whole child, educating the whole child, and really supporting young people with attending to their inner life. And so for me, to educate is to awaken the wisdom within. And I try to say to my son, like, who are you meant to be in the world? Like, how do I just create the conditions for you to blossom into your fullness, instead of trying to, like, all right, do this. And I'm still a mom. I'm still so conditioned, being born and raised in the United States. And um but um how can I really just hold loving space for him to awaken into his fullness of who the universe has meant for him to be in this incarnation? And so, the work that I'm currently doing. So, I co-founded an organization with two colleagues, Linda Lantieri, who is really one of the founders of the field of social and emotional learning, and my colleague Daniel Reckstoffen, who founded and ran, the longest running mindfulness and education conference in the world for many years. And we founded an organization called Transformative Educational Leadership back in 2018. Since we started, we've had 138 leaders come through our program, impacting more than 400,000 students, and we're a national nonprofit. And we are focused on supporting educational leaders with integrating their inner life with their outer action in the world. So supporting educational leaders who really want to walk this path of being sacred activists. And it's been such a powerful, amazing journey, because, the day we got seed funding was the same day I gave birth to my son. So I feel like I have been on this twin journey of helping to birth this organization and raising my son, and all that comes in with birthing something into the world, and really listening to, similar to my son, I try to listen to, we call transformative educational leadership, we call it TEL for short, but what does the spirit of TEL need right now? What is needed for the spirit of the organization? And we've had a lot of evolution in good ways. And, from the start, we also have been very committed to ensuring that the space was incredibly diverse. So our first cohort was 40%. Our second cohort was, both our successive cohorts have been more than 50% leaders of color. And that's a very important value that we have. And kind of where we are now is really trying to figure out, how do we build a multiracial, beloved community? Because this is something that really hasn't been done before. And there's a lot of challenges and growth opportunities that come with that. And for me, I've been on my own journey. We started off with integrating equity, mindfulness, social and emotional learning, and transformative leadership, but really felt a couple years in that those terms, at least for me, felt a little anemic, like social emotional learning, mindfulness, equity, like there's no life force.
Mm-hmm.
So where we are now is really the shift towards interbeing and co-liberation, and beloved community. And those are really the kind of the three core elements of the work that we're doing with educational leaders, with the ultimate vision that these leaders go back and create their own beloved educational communities in the schools that they lead. And I said earlier that transforming education is how we'll transform the world. And I really feel that my one of my many purposes is to harness education to really build a more compassionate and equitable world. I also, when I was sharing earlier, kind of feel like I'm at this threshold. One of the other things that I've been exploring a lot and doing in my own kind of living lab has been exploring tenderness. I actually have a TED Talk coming out in a few weeks around unlocking the secret powers of tenderness. And it's really connected to what I feel is a very important but often overlooked emotion that is foundational to creating the conditions for belonging. So, back to your original question about learning, education, and development, I think it ultimately um, has to be about supporting young people and knowing who they are, navigating their internal life and the external world, and having a sense of agency. But being able to answer that, the $1 million question, who am I? And then the next
Hmm.
$1 million question, and what am I here to do in the world to make it a
Oh,
better place?
beautiful. Yeah, we're coming to an end, and I that's just such a beautiful thing to end on. We're nearing our end, a few more minutes here, and I'm just at awe of the work that you're doing. I think it's great. I am an educator. I love the process of learning and what is possible in education, and to have leaders in education and to train them to think in terms of interbeing. It's just beautiful and much needed. And I think you have a lot to give the world, and you're doing it. And I really commend you on that. And audience, I really encourage you to go and look up Meena's work on the website. We will make sure to have a longer bio and some contact information there for you to get in contact with Meena. Um, Before we leave, I want to um, can you summarize in just a few words here after this conversation the characteristics of living well or the good life? What are
Mm,
some really core characteristics? What does it look like, or attributes?
yeah. Well, I think one is just um, to really reflect on what gives you purpose and meaning. Like, what is it that lights you up?
Mm-hmm.
Without that, it's I think it's hard to live well, and whatever that may be, to just honor that. I think another important component of living well is community. Finding your people, finding your tribe, so important. And I feel like I've been blessed with so many spiritual friends, or we say in the Buddhist tradition, kalyana mitras in my life. And so to find your people, find what gives you real meaning. And then something we didn't talk about, but I know you have a lot of connections on, and we'll have another offline conversation, is just um, taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually. But I'm also a student of Ayurveda, and those practices, which are rooted in my ancestral lineage as well, have been foundational to how I move in the world. I have we call it a dinacharya, my daily routine that I've been following for more than 20 years. And so when our health suffers, it's really hard for, I feel like it's the common denominator. It's the one thing that we really need to attend to, but to find what that means for you, what it means for you um, to be in balance. In Ayurveda, we talk about our Vakriti and our Prakriti, and our Vakriti is like sort of like our, like the current imbalanced state many of us are at, and the goal of Ayurveda is to come back to your Prakriti, like the state in which you are meant to be. And not everyone is meant to be skinny and have a six pack, and not everyone, it's really touching into kind of what I said early on, like, who are you meant to be in this life, and to owning that and acknowledging that, and to, as Krishna said to Arjuna, to live your life, not someone else's.
Mm, beautiful. That's a question that we'll leave for the audience to reflect on. Thank you so much, Meena,
Oh,
for
thank you, Brother
your
Broderick.
for your
So good to
wisdom.
reconnect. I wish I was still
Yeah.
back in the Bay because we'd get to hang out more. But if you're ever in San Diego, please look me up. My husband and I would love to reconnect with you. And for listeners, if you don't already know, Broderick is an infinitely talented human being. And we first met because he was one of the yoga teachers at a people of color meditation retreat I was doing in Spirit Rock 9 years ago with my husband. And shortly after, I was so moved by these evening musical meditations he'd lead that I had him perform at my first book launch. And his music is music that comes from the depths of his soul. So you are in the hands of a someone who I feel embodies loving awareness and is an important teacher of our time. So I'm just blessed to have you in my trans global pan spiritual family, Broderick. So good to be
Awesome.
reconnected with you, brother.
Definitely. You too. I feel the same way. And
Mm.
before we sign off, you're a way that the audience can contact you, and I'll make sure to put it all in the show notes as well as on the website. But do you want to share a website or anything like that?
Yeah, well, you can find me at Heart of Meena, although I have a complex relationship with social media, so I'm not someone I'm just reflecting on what is, yeah, just touching in a lot around it and really wanting that to be something of service to the world. But you can find me at Heart of Meena. You can also go to my website, meenasrinivasan.com. And yes, it's a long last name, but not in India. My name is like Kate Smith in Tamil Nadu. There's so many other Meena Srinivasans out there, but I think I might be the only one with the website Meena Srinivasan. Actually, in fact, I am. So you could just find that. And there's a resource tab where there's tons of guided meditations and articles. And I have an online course around social emotional learning that's, really heavily discounted now just to meet the moment that we have so many needs in our education system. So feel free to check those out.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care, my friend. Thank you for
Mhm.
listening, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.